Welcome to the Time for a Reset podcast, the podcast where I, Paul Frampton, interview senior marketers on the big issues of the day and the thing that they want to see reset with an ever-changing landscape. Good morning and welcome back to another Time for a Reset podcast. This morning is a podcast with a difference. It's in an area that I and my guests are very passionate about. More people are turning to social media for news than ever before. Movements like Black Lives Matters over the last few weeks and Me Too a few years back are scaled globally via social media. We have an American president, for good or bad, that tweets multiple times a day. Yet most CEOs are still absent from social media. Most leaders are not actively there. More than ever in the crisis that we're all kind of living through, the COVID crisis, it feels like leaders need to be active in social channels. And in this unprecedented time, what better way to communicate with all of your stakeholders? So this podcast is going to be about the reset that leaders in marketing need to make to think about how they communicate with their various stakeholders. And I'm delighted today to actually be joined by three brilliant people who are all at the forefront of social and social leadership. So first off, we have Damien Corbett, who founded the Social C-Suite and also was the curator of a book called The Social CEO, which all of the guests today actually contributed a chapter to. The second guest is Michelle Carville, who's a social media consultant, a podcast host, an author, and has written many books on the topic of social leadership and just launched her own online training platform. And last but not least, Chris Bartley, who is the innovation director at a global health startup, a social platform for doctors, which is obviously pretty interesting space to be right now, and has also been an ex-agency guy for many years. So these guys together all have over 5,000 followers, so they definitely have authority to be able to talk on this topic. So without further ado, I'm going to turn first to Damien. So Damien, you had the brainwave to write the book called The Social CEO, to which each of the guests contributed a chapter. Could you maybe just start by telling us why you felt this book needed to be written?
Sure. It was something that it was kind of several years in kind of gestation. I had the idea about leadership for CEOs, about social leadership, quite a few years ago, going back to 2014. And I interviewed a lot of CEOs for my blog, and that kind of gave me the idea really that I think there was a book in this to help leaders understand more about social media. And, one of the things that I found in my own work previously was that when dealing with a lot of CEOs and marketing directors, often they were the ones who were the least knowledgeable about social media. And when they were hiring people into sort of marketing positions, they didn't, the people doing the hiring didn't necessarily see the importance of social media. So they would be hiring people in who didn't have social media skills. So we'd be getting sort of marketing managers and marketing assistants coming into companies not really knowing much about social media when they really should have known about it and they should have understood it. So I like to kind of think of it as kind of analog employees in digital positions. And, why was this happening? It was because the people at the top doing the hiring were clueless, really, about what social media meant, about its power. I would have conversations with sort of directors in my previous role, and they would say things, well, social media is something that my kids do, or, it's, why would I want to share pictures of my dinner, and that sort of thing, They didn't get it. They just didn't get it. So I thought it was time to actually, explain the power of social media. And I mean, I wasn't the first to do that. I mean, Michelle's done some really excellent books on this topic. Other people have written books on it. So the approach I took, rather than write the book myself, was curate it and get in a whole bunch of experts who really knew their stuff in kind of specific areas, where whether it's social selling, recruiting talent, marketing, and also to get a bunch of CEOs to write chapters from different sectors. So to kind of give a wider view of what social leadership meant and to help people understand it. So I think of it less as a how-to book, and more of a kind of why-to book, why social leadership is so important. So that's really that's in a nutshell why I did the book. I hope that makes sense.
It does. Fantastic. Thank you, Damien. And so I'm going to bring Michelle and Chris in to give a sense of why this topic is important. And then we're going to kind of free flow through the rest of this. And any of the three guests will jump in and answer questions. So it's just going to be a conversation. So maybe I'll turn to you first, Michelle. Why is this topic so important to you?
Well, I suppose in a similar way to Damien. You know, this was something that I kept butting up against, shall we say, for many years. So for years we were doing training and consulting and helping organizations around the world, you know, to understand what social meant. And that was from a more of a kind of how to, how to do things, the practicalities of it. But as a marketeer, of course, I always approached it from a strategic perspective. You know, it's got to be integrated. It's got to be aligned with everything you're doing from a marketing perspective. So a lot of the people I were training were marketing and comms teams. And they would say, look, Michelle, we get it. We get it. We get the being objectively driven. We get how it needs to be integrated. The challenge we've got is that our leadership team don't get it, and so we can only go so far, and then, you know, we just don't get the budgets, we just don't get the, you know, the airtime to actually expand our activity in this space. And so it was out of really frustration from the people that I was working with that I thought, you know, these leaders, the C-suites, the senior leadership teams, the senior marketeers, they need to understand what's going on. And before I wrote Get Social, which was all about, you know, strategy for leaders to understand how to get social, I actually did I was contacted on 2 occasions within a 6-week period. So maybe they knew one another. And to this day, I don't know who they are, but I was asked to coach 2 senior leaders. I knew they were senior leaders because it was their PAs that contacted me initially, anonymously. I couldn't know who they were because they were embarrassed that they didn't know this stuff. They felt that they needed to know this stuff, but they were embarrassed they didn't know it. So could I coach them? And we had to do everything via the telephone to a number, you know. And it was a bit cloak and dagger, but it was, you know, it was a really great 6 weeks of coaching and really getting under the skin of what they needed to know. But there was clearly a level of embarrassment that they didn't know. And that's when I thought, you know, I need to do something here. We need to support people. You know, they shouldn't be feeling that they can't turn to their teams, and they, you know, not everybody needs to know about the technologies, but you need to know where they fit, what they do. And social, you know, is too important not to have integrated into your marketing activity. So that was really why I felt I had to start talking to leaders about it.
Really interesting insight, Michelle. Presumably you were allowed to know their names once you got on the first call, or did that not transpire till later?
I didn't, you know what, it was about halfway through that I actually got names, and I don't even, you know, to this day, I don't even know if it's real names. You know, I'm only, they were calling me Michelle, and I was like, so what do I call you? You know, so I got names. One was male, one was a female. But other than that, I genuinely do not know who they are.
Fascinating. Well, I mean, I guess that shows one of the challenges here. And Chris, let's turn to you to get your view on why the topic's important, and then we'll dig into some of these other insights.
Well, I guess now I have a really different perspective on it because I actually work at a social media platform, and so I have the benefit of watching just over 1.2 million doctors interacting with each other and engaging and using a social channel to talk to each other. And particularly over this most recent period, it's obviously been an incredible period of change for doctors as it has for the rest of us. And so just seeing how we perceive social media and then seeing how a whole audience use it is really interesting. And I guess to give an insight into that, MedShare is a bit like LinkedIn, but it's a closed community for healthcare professionals only. And what they do is, in much the same way as we share posts with each other, they share patient cases with each other. And you sort of immediately, you would think that they would be using that to get a second opinion or something like that. But of course, that's not how they use it, because that's not how we use social. We all use social because we want to exchange things that we're interested in. We want to exchange ideas that will help us enhance our thinking and our understanding. And that's just how doctors use our platform. They're sharing things not to get a second opinion directly for that patient. They're sharing things that they're interested in that they want to start a conversation on, that they want to broaden their perspective around. And often you see doctors who are specialists in dermatology engaging in conversations around gastroenterology or oncology, not because they're expert in it, but because they're fascinated by that, because that's not what they get to do on a day-to-day basis, and they're kind of taking in some learnings. And similarly, across this time period of COVID, it's been amazing to watch doctors in China and then in Italy and then the UK sharing elements, very practical elements, sometimes around whether they should reuse personal protective equipment or these kind of things, sharing some of those insights. And then doctors in parts of the world where COVID has been emerging have been able to shorten their learning curve around some of these things by seeing that experience being shared, shorten the learning curve, and then improve the way that they're managing and treating patients, the way they're protecting themselves from the disease. And it sort of echoes that probably why we all love social so much, simply because you're able to gain those insights, those bits of experience. You can shorten your learning curve. You can share at scale and interact with people in geographies and in ways that you simply can't do without having a social network. Your own personal network and personal connections are just that little bit smaller and more limited. So I guess now that's helped shape my my perception of my own use of social media in some senses.
Lovely, Chris. Beautifully put, and I love the use case for sharing knowledge and ideas within an organisation or outside of an organisation. I think we often think about social media as platforms where you're interacting with people outside of your org, but of course there are great kind of social platforms and communication platforms that sit internally that can help actually organizations connect the nodes and the different superpowers together. So going back to something that I think was brought up by Damien and you, Michelle, quite often brands, as we call them, have a separate manifestation of the brand for the employer. The HR department leads on that, the customer, the marketing department leads on that, and then the employee. Surely these should be one and the same, and doesn't social media force that today, that unless you have consistency between what maybe the CEO of the business is saying, what the marketing department are pushing out as advertising, and what is being said to the employees, surely it comes a bit unstuck, particularly in the world we're in right now, where people are being furloughed and they're seeing advertising for their companies going out. How do you guys think about that?
Do you want to go first, Michelle?
Yeah, carry on.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one because obviously, I mean, I'm not necessarily a branding or a marketing expert, but so I probably should defer to, to the rest of you on this. But in terms of how they should be integrated, I think there needs to be an integrated message. But the brand social media accounts will, by their very nature, they will be promoting the brand. Whereas the CEO, for example, will have to, obviously, they have to all be in sync and be, working in the same direction. But the CEO will be, will be talking about other issues as well, because it's a personal account. They can bring in other aspects of their lives to kind of humanize the brand a bit more. And the example that I have is Jack Salzwedel, who's the CEO of American Family Insurance. So he will share brand messages, he will share updates, but he will also talk about personal things. He'll talk about sport, he'll talk about things like that. And so, but it all has to be aligned, really. That's my take on it. So I think I'll give Michelle.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It has to be aligned, and as if you think about, and I think if anybody across the business, regardless of where they sit, thinks about that social media are brand touch points and they're consistent brand touch points. So, whether that's the CEO talking or, the latest campaign, or indeed, it's a recruitment drive, they're all part of the same brand. And so, yeah, there needs to be visibility across, well, what are the messages? What is it that we're talking about? Because you don't want that awkward, hang on a minute, we're laying people off, and hang on a minute, we've got recruitment going off over there. So, it's got to be aligned. And that's relatively simple to orchestrate, because if you've got there are different ways of setting up how you manage social internally. You might have a central team that manages everything. You might have each individual department that manages their own, but there needs to be almost an editor, the final editor of, well, I always think of it like a newsroom. You might have many journalists, and those journalists are covering different departments, but there does need to be a centralized editor so that there is a view as to this is what the news that we're putting out there looks like. And so there's that aspect from the kind of, the CEO and everybody understanding what everybody's saying. Of course, that comes down to listening and watching what's going on with your own channels as well, not just listening and watching what's going on with the landscape and your competitors and particularly trending things that might pose opportunities, but also listening internally, listening to your own channels and seeing. And there have definitely been times where, I've been speaking to people in senior leadership situations where they've found out things that are going on in their own organization through Twitter.
Yeah.
They didn't know about it until they saw it on Twitter, and it's kind of like, okay, and you're in the senior leadership team. Maybe we need to be joining up some dots.
Yeah, and you talk about it's actually quite simple to orchestrate. And when you talk about it, it sounds very very easy. A lot of organizations get that wrong, that editor curator bit, don't they? And I mean, I'm sure we've seen more examples of organizations getting it wrong rather than getting it right. What is that hiring a new role, or is there something simpler that you recommend that organizations do to join these things up?
I think a lot of it is just not strategically driven, and I think that sometimes it's like marketing, sometimes it's put in a kind of promotional bubble rather than actually, this is something that hits across the organization, across all of the various aspects. And so I'm not saying it's easy, but if it's a strategic endeavor, it's something that you invest in and you make sure that it is as, if you think about it, you should be investing in your brand. If social is one of the most consistent brand touch points that you've got, consistently, continuous conversations, then that needs investment and structure.
Well, I think that that's also why it's important for leaders to take part in social as well, because having worked with many organizations who are 100,000 people plus, the idea that internally you'll be coordinated and on message and even thinking the same things, doing the same things, the organizations of that size even know all of the things that the different people in that company know isn't really realistic. But exactly as you said, if the company is portraying a consistent message on its external channels, if its leadership is delivering a message that's consistent with that through the channels that they use, both internal and through their external social media platforms, and then that's consistent with what the brand and marketing teams across the company are also sharing, and not consistent in that every message is exactly the same, but simply that the tone is quite similar and consistent. That then gives you the best chance of your employees being advocates of that message as well, and there not being those inconsistencies between what your official channels are saying and then what some of your 100,000 employees are also sharing through their personal channels, which may not be aligned with that message and actually may be contrary to it. So I think that that's the value of having those three things at least loosely aligned in terms of tone, and it's the job of people in senior roles to communicate internally and externally in the tone that they wish their employees to then share that message out across, which ultimately then reaches customers as well. So I think that getting those things is easier as long as you don't try and control all of it and you just allow that tonal message to be similar.
I love that, Chris. And in fact, what you talk about is one of the key reasons that I started using social so heavily when I was at Havas, actually, was the fact that I realized that a weekly update or a town hall wasn't enough frequency to actually make sure that people felt that they knew what was going on. And of course, a lot of your talent are on social media a lot of the time, and that's where they pick up messages. They get a sense of who you are as an individual, if you're a leader. So I think it allows for some humanity to come through, but also, as you say, it's another touch point. And I think you nicely take us on to this fact that actually being on social channels isn't just about communication. There are obviously lots of other benefits. Are there any other benefits that you would call out, Michelle or Damien, around how an organisation or a leader can benefit from being active on social?
Well, there's definitely. I mean, there are so many benefits apart from, from sending out messages and communication. I mean, we've touched on the thing about about demonstrating transparency and being human, and that's so important at the moment when there's so much sort of angst in the world and so much worry, that to demonstrate your humanity as a leader, I think, is so important, because that sets the tone, which Chris touched on earlier. It sets the tone for the whole organization, and but it's also about it can help with the brand, with the leader being active on social media and having a very consistent way of doing things, and that aligned with the organization, but it's their own personal message, help to personalize and humanize the brand. As well as their own personal brand, if they are looking to move on to different roles. There's employers, headhunters will look at their social profiles.
Yeah,
it's really important for attracting talent, as well. People will look at, these days, when people have the option to, if people have the option to, I'm sure a lot of them would rather go and work for somebody who they see as active on social, who is, who is aligned with their way of thinking.
And there's actually evidence.
Actually
evidence that people are attracted to organisations that have an active CEO or active leader on social.
Definitely, yeah.
Yep. And I think, just to add to that, to lead, you need followers, and it's not just about social followers, but this is the perfect opportunity to be visible and to connect with your employees. I mean, I think, John Lejeune from T-Mobile, love him or hate him, I mean, he's right out there, and he's very, very transparent, and
personality, isn't he?
He's very conversational, and he, if there's a new employee, he will say, welcome to the business, and they are tweeting like crazy, like, oh my gosh, the CEO just said welcome to the business, oh, what, I just love this place. And it's not difficult, is it? It's just being human, and you can't, Chris talked about hundreds of thousands of employees. If you're the CEO of a global operation and you've got hundreds of thousands of employees and they're all around the world, you can't get round to see all of them. You can't get round to say hello to them and meet and greet all of them, but you can start to connect with them digitally, at scale, and not just connect with them, but listen to what they're saying, understand, spot opportunities. I know in the podcast, I've interviewed a number of leaders, and a number of times the same thing comes up that talks about, it was somebody who came back to me because social media almost gave them permission to speak to me. It's a hierarchy buster, People can just speak directly, say what it is that they think. They may not put their hand up in the room. They may not ever come into my office and have the courage to speak to me face to face, but digitally they will give me their feedback. And I've spotted so many opportunities, and we've taken on some great ideas that, had I not been able to connect with these people on the ground, that we would never have been able to understand or know that insight, or explore it further, and sense that kind of beat of the drum that's going on in areas that you just don't get to see when you're you're looking through a different window.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the kind of listening in is an aspect that people don't always think about. It's a great way to tap into what's going on, to the zeitgeist of your industry. You can build Twitter lists of sort of experts and competitors and peers, and you can see what people are saying in real time. You can get a feeling if a crisis emerges or something happens. You can know before it's actually in the news. So it's like tapping into the global brain in a way. And as a leader, why wouldn't you want to do that?
Well, and there's a wonderful example of that, I think, is Arne Sorensen, who's the Marriott CEO, and you guys probably saw the video that he released very early on in the COVID crisis, which was actually not an external piece. It was an internal piece within Marriott that got recorded and then got distributed by loads and loads of people across social media. But when you listen to that video and you see him talk, it's very clear that he immediately captures the way that everybody, not just in Marriott, the way that pretty much everybody across the world was feeling about COVID and feeling about their job and about their insecurities around it and about what the future would hold and the risks to your health and all that stuff. It was clear that he was plugged in, whether it was through social or whether it was through interactions he had in person, that he demonstrated all of the things that we and Marriott employees were feeling. He demonstrated a really lovely understanding of how to turn that into action, with them volunteering to take a 50% pay cut as a leadership team, which was more than they were asking their employees who were being furloughed and have very uncertain futures to do. And that demonstration of humanity and leadership was then amplified hugely across social media. And I have no doubt that while people probably won't remember that talk specifically, but so many people saw that. So many people, when they see the Marriott brand in 6 months' time, when hopefully we're all getting back to being able to travel around and stay in hotels and do nice things, will see that logo, see that brand, and there'll be a tiny association with it in the back of their mind that has a warmth and a sentiment to it. And it's a best case, but that's the power of social, and that's the power of leaders on social to support their brand and support that story.
And I suppose he demonstrated brave leadership and did it through social. And there are some other good examples of leaders that have done that, like James Timpson is very active on Twitter the whole way through the COVID crisis. He's been very proactive about talking about how they're dealing with furlough, even sharing the costs that the money they're investing in topping up furlough costs when they're opening their stores. So he's very cleverly used it to talk to customers, employees. But we are very aware of the good examples because we focus a lot on it. But let's face it, there are lots of absent CEOs. And I know, Damien, you called out one particularly in the last week or so on LinkedIn, Alex Cruz of the CEO of British Airways. There's on Twitter and other platforms, there's a hashtag kind of surfacing and going around, hashtag BA betrayal, and yet he's completely absent. Like, how can a leader not recognize that they need to join that conversation? Is it maybe the fear that Michelle talked about at the beginning?
I think, part of it is, first of all, I'm not a big fan of calling out people on social, because I'm sure that the CEO of BA is under enormous pressure and he's really struggling, to try and keep the company afloat. But the fact that he has a Twitter account and he has a LinkedIn account, he's there. He was tweeting up until March. He was retweeting. His last tweet was a retweet before the kind of the crisis got really bad. He's out there. He's said, look, I'm here. I'm on social. And then suddenly he goes silent. And there is he's not been, as far as I know, he's not been communicating internally very well either. And I think he did a pre-recorded video a few days ago for all the staff and for the media, where he was basically, it was almost like, oh, woe is me, sort of feeling sorry for himself because they're being they being criticized so much because of the way they're handling the crisis. But I think it's just astounding when there is this hashtag going around. There are, as I think Michelle might confirm, that there are kind of spoof accounts being set up in his name that are actually giving information out to people. And he's not there. Is he even aware that this is happening? Is his comms team, or is his assistants, do they even know that this is happening? It's astounding that they seem to be totally oblivious to all of this going on around them. It just shows a lack of understanding of what social media is, as far as I can tell.
Michelle, if you were consulting for BA, what would you tell them or tell Alex that they should be doing instead?
Well, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? It's almost like, I remember in the early days, just to give a bit of a long-winded answer to that question, but early days when social first came out, as a marketeer, I remember thinking, whoa, you know, for years and years, brands have talked about wanting to get close to the customer, talk to the customer, you know, and then really putting into position operations and systems to do anything but talk to the customer. And so when social channels came about, I just thought, whoa, this is really going to show, this is really just going to really, you know, separate the wheat from the chaff here. Who is going to show up well and succeed here, and who are going to kind of get left behind and scrabble around, because not many brands and organizations really do want to have conversations with customers because they're not going to like what they hear. And of course, over the years, as it's evolved, we've seen all of that come to play, you know, and we've seen organizations get to grips with social and take it far more seriously than they did when they did think it was just purely about showing, you know, photographs of people eating their breakfast. And now I think the same thing is happening with leaders. You know, it's which leadership, you know, leadership is being exposed on social media, and there'll be some leaders that are really comfortable and genuinely, authentically want to have a great relationship with their customers and get that the customer is powerful and really understand that. And then there are some that are leaders that they may be brilliant, you know, they may be brilliant in many other ways, but they're not really customer focused. And some of them may have, you know, their ego may be getting into the way, and it's more about the role than actually serving. And I think this comes down to the role of leadership and the difference that we now expect as consumers from leaders. And some people are going to get that right, and some people, because it's organic and it's natural to them, and some people are going to really, really struggle with that. And I think what we're seeing now is this pandemic has brought forward those that are getting it right and those that are really struggling with it. Unfortunately, I think Alex is really struggling with that customer focus approach.
Right. Okay. We're going to come back to that bit around how the crisis is changing behaviour in a second. Just want to call out, because a lot of the listeners will be in marketing or the kind of ad land agency space. So some examples of leaders that maybe jump in occasionally and are silent. So Martin Sorrell jumped in on September 2017 to set up his Twitter alongside Jack Dorsey in Mexico, received 1,400 likes and never tweeted again. Arthur Sadoun launched, as the CEO of Publicis, launched Marcel, their AI project in June 2017. Great start. Started a hashtag all about Marcel to have a live Twitter chat with his staff, the industry analysts, then was never seen again on Twitter. To be fair, there are good examples. I mean, my old boss, Yannick Bolloré, and actually kind of your old boss as well in some ways, Chris, I guess. He's very active on social media. He's younger and probably a little bit more connected, which maybe helps, but he posts personal updates, business updates, has posted around COVID and uses video. So there are good examples, but it's clear that quite a lot of people are in that camp of staying away, not recognizing that this is something that their customers and employees expect. So let's talk about where we're at this point in time. A lot of conversation has been around this crisis. COVID will change this. Do we think that more leaders' behaviours will change out of this? Do you see more? I know, Michelle, you touched on something in our pre-chat around some CEOs are really taking a role as activists around people, planet, purpose, and the fact that because they have influence, they have followings and they have authority, they can actually drive change. Do we think there'll be more of that as a result of this, or are we still a little bit pessimistic about leaders taking this up?
Well, I'm a radical optimist, and I do think this has opened the eyes of organisations and leaders to, you know, they may not have figured out everything that they're going to do with it yet, but I think that they realise that there are more eyeballs on digital, more eyeballs on social, more, you know, that these connected technologies have kind of what have kept many of us connected over the past few months, and what does that mean for business? And you know, we're starting to see that play out with, you know, some of the things that, you know, you saw the high street and Boohoo are buying online businesses. You know, things are changing from kind of offline to online. So yeah, I do think it will have awoken some leaders to maybe have the courage to just get on out there and actually start to have conversations. Yeah, I do think so.
Damien, Chris?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, isn't it? Because when you look at the two most recent kind of big discussions on social, they are really hard conversations to be part of. And when you think about that from that kind of big corporate leadership perspective, the pitfalls and the potential for making mistakes around some of those incredibly sensitive topics, actually there are some real potential for pitfalls there. I mean, you see it even with political leaders who are pretty experienced in this space and taking a lot of advice. A slight misphrase here or there can really create a significant backlash. So I think it's going to be interesting to see. I think we almost need to get past this period of incredible change to see whether people are or aren't going to adopt it more, because I would guess there's some caution. But I think hopefully, I mean, the advice that I would give to them is being there and being present so that you can see the sentiment can only help you not to make some of those mistakes. You know, the cultural sentiment that's very clear. You only have to be on social to start to absorb some of the sentiment that there is at the moment. The sentiment of the people who are working in the same organization as you and the way that they're feeling. You know, and the BA example is a good one there around what seems to be the case is just a slight disconnect between the employees and the understandable sentiment that they have around what's happening at British Airways, just to touch back on that example, but the sentiment that's happening there, but also how the customers of British Airways feel about that as well. Whereas I think, you know, if you're open to those conversations, if you're listening to lots of people, and social gives you that wonderful ability to listen to hundreds of thousands of people very, very quickly, it helps you guide those communications. And it doesn't matter whether those comms are you across social or you internally within the business, they will help you to capture that sentiment better and to deliver the message that's going to help the business move forward with a better context around it, and a way that, you know, it touches on the things that your teams are feeling, that your customers are feeling about things that are happening to them on an everyday basis. So I think that's the big value, even if there's not a comms output to it, but that it's as much about understanding that sentiment and reflecting it.
Absolutely. Nice.
Yeah, I agree. I think tapping into the sentiment is important. And I know we haven't got a huge amount of time, but I would just add that I think, you know, there is a lot of, there's still a lot of fear out there for leaders, particularly if they are in organizations that have shareholders and the share price is sensitive. To say the wrong thing can have, you know, some devastating effects on the share price of an organization. And I think, you know, we are in a bit of a catch-22 situation. I think we have to admit that. You know, there's an expectation for leaders to be on social, and yet the dangers of social, you know, we shouldn't, you know, there are dangers of saying the wrong thing, and the implications can be quite bad. Yeah. So I think there needs to, I think the industry generally, you know, social media trainers, internal comms people, they need to step up, and they need to actually almost take social media a lot more seriously and actually build in kind of systems to protect leaders, to give them so that they have support, they have a support network around them, so that, you know, they have the ability to talk out about issues. But it's done cautiously to start, perhaps, and that no risks are taken. But I think, you know, people just doing it without the proper training and without knowing what they're doing is you know, that's a recipe for disaster. And I think it just needs to be taken a lot more seriously. And I think that's still sort of seen as, oh, well, you know, it's something that we might do if we have time. That's gone. You know, it's gone now. We've seen with COVID, with Black Lives Matter, there will be more crises coming along. You know, there'll be another crisis, you know, soon, where leaders will be expected to speak out. You know, it's not going to stop. It's going to carry on. And I think that's just the harsh reality. If you're going to be a leader in 2020 and beyond, you need to be social media savvy. And I think there's no getting around that as far as I can see.
And there's a perfect example of that, a perfect, Lloyd Blankfein, who was the previous CEO of Goldman Sachs,
Yes.
he on Twitter, he had thousands, I think he had 100,000 followers on Twitter, and he'd never tweeted. And the financial crisis came in 2008, and they got a lot of flack. And years later, he actually took to Twitter, and he openly talks about it in on various news reports, that the reason he started Twitter is because he was frustrated that they hadn't had a voice during the financial crisis, and that all of their PR and comms team and legal team is saying, no, you can't say anything, it's too risky. And there's a lot of risk aversion in the industry, and he regretted that. And so he came out and learnt the ropes, understood how to utilize the channels, watched and saw everything and realized that they were powerful, and then started to utilize Twitter because, in his words, he wanted to set the record straight and get the news out straight from the horse's mouth, rather than all the Chinese whispers, and he said, had we been able to do that from the outset, it would have stopped a lot of the backlash against their brand.
Yeah, and I like the fact that we're recognizing that this isn't easy, that there are a lot of challenges, and you're going to have departments or people that are going to say to you as a leader, you need to do this way. So it does take some time and some confidence and some education. As Damien said, we're running a little bit short. We could probably talk about this all day, right? Because we're all so passionate about it. I'm going to just move towards two final questions. The first is for anyone that wants to jump in. Are all social platforms appropriate for leaders to express themselves in? Like TikTok's grown massively in the last few months in lockdown. Is TikTok or Instagram as relevant as LinkedIn or Twitter if you're a business leader?
I think you fish where the fish are, don't you? Where are your audience? For some organizations and for some leaders, their audience is going to be on, the demographic that is more likely to be on Instagram. And if that's their role to try and engage directly with the customer, then fine, be on Instagram. Jean Lejeune does that very, very well. But probably, from a business professional perspective, there's a kind of expectation that LinkedIn is more about networking. So, it depends. Do you want to be on there from a brand personal perspective, maybe listening, engaging? Yes, perhaps. But I would say Twitter is still probably the communication tool that is both respected as in the more professional stance. It's a little bit more, shall I dare say, intelligent than the other channels. So I would say, start with Twitter, or just start listening with Twitter. But yeah, TikTok, I'm not sure. I'm sure some CEOs will make it, smash it, but I'm sure it'll be short-lived.
I guess I would say that from the brand's point of view, you absolutely need to be where your target audience are, and that blend between organic, earned, and paid strategies is going to be really important in terms of reaching those. As a person, as an individual, I think you've just got to be where you're comfortable and where you're interested, because I think that if you're not comfortable and interested, it's going to be a real struggle to be engaged. It's going to be a real struggle to share. It's going to be a real struggle to listen to what's going on. So I think I guess the only advice I would give to anyone picking up a social media thing is, if you're looking at a channel or a platform and you don't get it and you're not interested in it and you don't think you're going to get there, then there's probably another channel that may be more appropriate for you, because there's such diversity out there. There's so many different ways and formats to share. There's so many different types of people across social media who you can engage with. There's definitely something you're going to find fascinating, and that's probably where you should be, where you should be engaging as an individual.
You need to be engaged to engage other people, don't you? I think that's key.
Exactly.
And
well, I think that's sort of sorry, if we can just add, about being interested in a platform, I think also you need to be interesting. And I think if you're going to go on something like TikTok, I spoke to my daughter who's 14, and she said, "Oh, Dad, please, don't let
Please don't.
CEOs take over this account. It's the one account that we have that hasn't been, taken over by corporate interests, which I thought was quite an interesting thing for a 14-year-old to say. But, if a CEO was on there and was actually really interesting and fun and got a message across, people would watch them. But if you're going to be, if they're not interesting, no one will watch them anyway. So,
Fair point. Okay, I'm going to bring us to a close, guys, because I'm conscious of time. So my last question, which some of you have alluded to already, would be, if there is a leader of any kind, particularly someone that's in the marketing industry, given that's pretty much the kind of audience for this podcast, that's listening and is scared to write that first tweet or first LinkedIn post, or maybe they've done it before and they got some kind of negative engagement, or they started and they stopped. What advice would you give to them? Because I think this whole conversation has argued that this is extremely important to get right strategically, and you can't just put it in the too hard box. So what's the one thing that you would say, Michelle?
I would say figure out what you want to be known for and seen as.
Great. Damien?
I would say define your goals, which is sort of what Michelle said, but know why you're doing it.
And Chris, last but not least?
I suppose in terms of de-risking it, I would say talk to people. It's incredibly and social is obviously what you're going to do. You're going to talk to a whole bunch of people. If you're worried about how you're going to come across, if you're worried about how you're going to be received, have a conversation with the people close to you, with your friends, family, just about those topics, and you'll very quickly understand whether what you're going to say and the types of things you're going to share are going to be received, and that can just help you to feel a little bit more comfortable that you aren't too far removed from what others are sharing and the conversation that's happening. So I think social is just a great platform to scale up the conversations that you would have with the people around you anyway. So that's sort of the start point that I would recommend for them is have those one-to-one conversations with people, test the sentiment, test what you're going to say, and then share it at a bigger scale.
Nice advice, and great reminder that in actual fact that's what social should be, like a conversation. And to some extent, a lot has been talked about the fact that you can learn and understand what your employees or your customers are thinking, and it's almost like that, the ability to listen into a conversation in a pub at scale, yet people somehow are frightened of it because it's technology. So look, I'm hugely grateful to all three of you for making the time for this. I've learned stuff, and it's an area that I spend a lot of time thinking about. So I'm sure that listeners have as well. Thank you to you, Damien, Michelle, and Chris. Really, really appreciate your time.
Pleasure. Great to be here.
Thanks, Paul. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. That's been really insightful and great talking with you all.
Thank you for tuning into this latest podcast. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. We'll be back again very soon, interviewing a senior marketer and understanding what they would like to reset in the marketing industry. In the meantime, if you want to check out me, you can find me on Twitter, Paul_Framp, and you can find my new business, which is a hybrid marketing consultancy helping with in-housing, digital strategy and marketing attribution at controlvexposed.co.uk, on Twitter under CVE, or on LinkedIn under controlvexposed. Look forward to you coming back next time and having more interesting conversations. Thank you.